May had a great communicative ability, a rap, so to speak. I asked her about, I wanted her to do something for sex education. She said, well, it's not sex education that bothers me. It's the homework. Anyhow, he had started up May, and he had had about 9 plays running concurrently on Broadway, and 8 or 9 plays running concurrently on Broadway in about 1909. And he discovered this thing about the Illuminati. And I said, Myron, somebody had introduced me to him as having the man to have the answers. I said, we've got to take this information and put it out, because the world doesn't have it. And if you were to pass someday, and he was old then, there might not ever be another chance for this planet Earth. So I got together with him, and I put this thing together. I figured if we could just put out 1,000 sets. It was a 3-volume set. Expensive for then. And I said, just 1,000 sets, if we could just do this. Then maybe that story would be told and retold and retold. And no one on the planet had done that. But in the spring of 1967, I released the Illuminati CFR records. I sent a free copy to all of the Congress and most of the Senate, and stated why I hadn't sent it to the full Congress and Senate. After we had released it, I figured that we just sold 1,000 sets. The first week we'd sold 1,100 sets, which is 3,300. And reports were coming back where they heard it on a ship and off the west coast of Africa. All sorts of stories were coming back from the Pitcairn Islands and from Indonesia, etc. People around the world were hearing it. By 1970, we approximated the numbers judged upon the amount of radio stations and the listeners that they had. That we had reached about 34.5 million people. Today, there is over 1 billion people on this planet Earth who know about the Illuminati.
I think I was going to commend you on those terms have been synonymous and around the revolution, as we call it. It's a love revolution, of course. We put the love backwards in the revolution for Ron Paul. New terms like New World Order and Illuminati, and this whole subject, which
it's Illuminati. Our first
Nazi
did the first film on the 911 broadcast. In fact, Ted Gunderson had called me on the 11th and said they've done it. But we had been talking about them doing it in 1995, 6 years before. We said they'd come back because everybody should know that the first explosion that occurred at the World Trade Center was paid for by the United States taxpayer. And people said, oh, Mr. Hilder, you've got to be crazy.
You're ahead of your time.
But we knew that that was the case, and they would be back.
Yeah.
So when you take a look at that first case, we know that Sheikh Abdul Rahman. I think that was it. But that's the blind cleric. You get all of these Arab names in your head. Sheikh Abdul Rahman. And he had a terrorist cell in Egypt. He and his terrorists came over here to the United States. And I'm thinking, well, how did they get Sheikh Abdul Rahman? How did he get here? How is it possible? Well, he didn't come in across the southern border. He didn't come across from Canada. He came across with a visa. The number one suspect in the assassination of Anwar Sadat came into this country with his terrorist cell from Egypt. And what in the world happened. They gave him the visa. They gave him the right to come into this country, and when he did, then the FBI started an investigation, and they used a fellow named Ahmad Salim, a retired Egyptian army officer, to infiltrate the terrorist cell. And Ahmad Salim came back and says, well, they were trying to provoke them to get into some sort of activity. He says, well, they're willing to do the Trade Center, but they don't have a bomb. He says, well, his handler, John Antisef with the FBI, said, well, you know how to make a bomb? He says, yeah, I know how to make a bomb, but what's that got to do with it? Well, if you know how to make a bomb, make it for him. He says, you're kidding. He says, no, make it for him. He says, but we're not going to use the real thing. He says, oh, no. And I guess that's what he was told in the beginning, but when he came back, he says, look, got the bomb, they built the bomb, but we're really not going to give them the detonator, are we? He says, no, you've got to give them the detonator, you got to make this look real. That was paid for by the United States taxpayers. And the first bomb went off in 93.
At the World Trade Center.
At the World Trade Center. And what happened, the recording, the wire recording that was being made, the conversation with Sheikh Abdul Rahman, was being made by this infiltrator, the retired Egyptian army officer, who was paid he was paid a salary by the FBI. So when he got into a conversation with the FBI agent, then when the FBI agent says, well, you got to give him the real thing, he started to be suspicious. And then he started to record his conversation with John Antisef from the FBI. So when it came to the trial, they were going to try to nail him and the retired Egyptian army officer. And he says, no way. So he came out with this information in the trial. Oh, it made the New York Times about near the death or the
buried in the newspaper.
Buried in little bits and pieces, something, but nobody would pick it up. They can hardly make it with stuff in those banner cap headlines on the front page. But when this was done and discovered by individuals like Ted Gunderson, a friend of mine, is former head of the FBI in Los Angeles, Dallas, and Memphis, we said to ourselves, they're going to come back and do it again. So on September 11th, 2001, we had a conversation, said, they've done it. I said, yeah. I said, we're taking bits and clips down now from the television because the first ones are generally the best. And by Halloween, we had finished Illuminati 911. Oh, it didn't make it well. It didn't, the advertising was dropped and other people wouldn't run it. And we just ran out of gas and ran out of money. But there was enough people out there who picked up on the idea and the thesis. And then along came a fellow named, you may know him. Actually, 2 or 3 guys put it together. A thing called Loose Change. And that's reached about 100 million people.
I have seen that one. It's that guy's from here in Santa Barbara, where I'm from. But you're exposing the false flag tactic, which was the same one that was used by Hitler. Ted and I in 1995 were doing a film called Reichstag 95. And we were talking about the Oklahoma building. And in 1995, that's when, at that particular session, we got into a conversation about them coming back to do the World Trade Center again. And of course, when you take a look at the buildings coming down in and upon themselves on their own footprint, in the molten steel beneath the, of course, I guess it couldn't melt that passport made out of kryptonite, of course. But we had a situation occur that is very understandable for people who can
think, but you've got to put your thinking cap on. You've got to be involved, engaged.